Okay, good evening, everybody. Jonathan here. Let me see if I can get this adjusted again. Alright, so what I'm doing right now is I'm going to try and get the nearly full moon into our line of sight. So that's why you're not seeing anything at the moment. Let's see. So we got that. Let's see. And there's the moon, so we got it in that sense, but let's try and adjust a little bit. That way we go up some. There we go. Let me see if I can adjust the focus of this. There we go. So that's just the very edge of the moon right now. We have a mostly full moon this evening, as you can probably see if you look out your window. And right now we're looking at the top left segment of the moon. And it's going to actually slowly change if you're looking closely. You can see how the moon itself is actually slowly moving from right to left on our screen. So you can see different aspects of the moon. Look at all those beautiful craters. And we just get a nice visualization of the surface of the moon as we would see it through my own telescope. Now, of course, if we wanted better quality, we would probably need to get like a special filter. Actually, being able to see all the detail on the surface of the moon can be a bit challenging because of how bright the surface actually can be. You see, the moon is normally so bright because it's like a giant mirror in the sky, constantly reflecting the sunlight that we have. So with the moon as full as it is right now, it is just super, super luminous. You can actually see towards the center of the screen that one really bright crater. All right, looks like we're coming towards the edge of the moon. So let's adjust again. Give me a second as I keep the moon in view. This is a bit tricky because I can't just go left and right. I have to kind of go left and up a little bit as we're ultimately fighting against the rotation of the Earth itself. And this just means that everything's kind of moving in a big arc. Okay, so here we are on the far left side of the moon again. Just a very beautiful shot of our moon this evening. You can actually see the camera shake a bit from the wind. If we look towards the bottom of the screen, we can actually see one of the biggest craters that the moon actually has. It's called Tyco Crater, named after the Polish astronomer, Tycho Brahe, who originally discovered it, or should I say, like one of the first people to really record it. So for those of you coming in right now, we are just looking at the full moon as it appears tonight. Sorry for the camera shake. Not much I can really do about that with the current wind conditions. And you can see how the moon is actually moving. We're coming towards the right side of the moon again. So I'm going to have to actually shift our view once more. Let me just adjust that. Oh, a little too much. Okay. Let's see, we got up enough, I would say. So let's try and go over a bit. Wind's blowing me every which way. Sorry about this loss of view for a moment. Looks like I went too high up, so we're just gonna tilt her down a little bit. There we go. Let's get a better view on that Tyco Crater if we can. Now, normally with the moon as bright as it is tonight, you don't want to look at it directly through a telescope or binoculars, as the brightness can actually damage your eyes, kind of like staring at the sun. And normally it's fine to look at the full moon with your naked eyes, but when you have some sort of magnification tools, that just takes all the light and just focuses it on your pupil. You can imagine how magnifying glass on a hot sunny day over an anthill would be. And it looks like we're moving over the moon again. There we go. Ooh. So tonight we don't have an actual full moon. we have what's known as a waning gibbous. And a waning gibbous is just a fancy astronomer way of saying that the moon is mostly full, but not completely. And the waning part, that just means that we're moving towards a new moon. When we get over to the right side of the moon, we'll actually see a slight dark sliver of blackness. And that just indicates that the moon itself is going to be getting darker each and every day, and rising a little bit later each and every day as well, until we reach that new moon period later on in the month. It's a real shame that I couldn't do this yesterday, because we actually had a lunar eclipse going on. It was, you might have seen the post, but we had a penumbral lunar eclipse, which is kind of like a very, very dim lunar eclipse. Alright, we can start to see some of the shadow. Ooh, really windy. Some of the shadow from the right side of the moon right now. And that's that waning part that we were talking about earlier. You can see that dark little sliver at the very far right side, where the moon kind of looks like it's cut off a bit. And that's not just my camera, that's also just, of course, from the fact that the moon is getting a little bit darker. Alright, now that the moon is kind of moving out of view, I'm going to have to adjust it once more. It's actually much easier having a big camera like this on the main lens. Normally I have to look through the spotting scope and then change my perspective back to the main portion, the main viewing part. There we go. Get a nice, beautiful look of some of those craters up there. It's just gorgeous to look at. Ooh, sure is windy tonight. Sure, I'm glad I'm bundled up, although it could definitely get a bigger coat. Now, for the reason why I have to constantly keep adjusting the telescope isn't because the wind is like shaking it uncontrollably. It's actually because the Earth's rotation is causing the moon itself to move out of our line of sight. Essentially, since the Earth is rotating so quickly, about 1,000 miles per hour, the moon is going to be regularly moving out of our view, especially as we get more and more focused with greater magnification. I tried to offset this a little bit by using a lower magnification this evening, and that just means that I won't have to adjust it as much, and we can also see a better part of the moon itself, like more of the overall disk. If we were zoomed in a whole bunch with, like, say, a 10mm eyepiece, well, we'd definitely be seeing, like, better detail on the surface of the moon, but it's not like we would actually be able to enjoy it, because, like, every couple of seconds I'd have to constantly, like, move the telescope over. This is really cool to look at. These dark spots that you can see sort of on the upper and right side of the moon, those are called the Maria, and those are sites of, like, ancient volcanic activity. Astronomers believe that the moon was once volcanically active, like billions of years ago, and all those dark spots are leftover, like, volcanic rock. And it's actually one of the reasons why we sent Apollo 11, the first moon mission, towards one of those dark Maria, because we're kind of curious about what they were. Oh, a little bit out of view. There we go. Got it back in line of sight. So essentially we wanted to see what those Maria were made of. So when Apollo 11 first landed, they landed in the Sea of Tranquility, which I believe is towards the bottom right of our view right now. But essentially, they landed in these dark spots to gather soil samples and be like, hey, what's this dark stuff made of? Because honestly, we didn't really have a good idea. Like, we could have had a hypothesis, but without having actual soil samples, there's really no way to guarantee it. Originally, when astronomers first discovered these dark spots, they thought they were like lakes or rivers or streams or even seas. Hence why it was called the Sea of Tranquility. Or if you look at a map of the moon, you can see other like sea portions, because older astronomers from like the Renaissance period were like, oh hey, this is definitely water. The Earth has life in water, so why wouldn't the moon? It's so close to us. I mean, they were doing the best with what they had at the time, so I don't really blame them. And we're just gonna scoot back to the left side of the moon. Man, this would be much easier if I had auto tracking equipment, but that stuff's pretty expensive and I can't really afford to set that up right now. Auto tracking is pretty cool though. What it can do is, like, say for instance right now we're looking at the moon, and I would just like tell the system, hey, keep focused on the moon, and it would adjust the telescope view up and down, left and right, to stay focused on like whatever part of the moon I wanted to stay on, without any physical adjustments needed from me. This stuff's really nice, but you generally need like a newer, more modern telescope as well that can really sync up with a computer. What I'm using right now is from the 90s, and as you can guess, you know, electronics and computers weren't really the highest of quality back then. I'm just gonna move back to the right side. There we go. That way we can see more of those craters. It's really beautiful right on the edge where we get that dark spot mixing with the light side. We can see more detail there because it's not fully washed out by like the brightness of the moon. And that's why you can see like all those craters and like valleys and like mountain peaks and everything. It's just beautiful to look at, honestly. I love being able to show this off to people. Most folks don't have the technology, the telescopes, whatever, to actually go out and view the moon to this great of detail. And we could go looking towards like the bottom of the view right now. We can see there's this big bright spot, and that's just a very reflective area of the surface of the moon. As I mentioned before, the moon itself isn't producing any light. It's just like a giant mirror reflecting sunlight. And when we have the moon this full, it just creates a whole bunch of reflections. Ooh, there's that wind again. Now that we've kind of moved directly off that part, we can see that crater on the left side called Tycho Crater. Really cool feature of the moon. I think it impacted like something like 70 to 80 million years ago on the surface of the moon. So if you were a dinosaur and you were roaming the Earth back then, you could have actually seen that impact happen. It would have been crazy to see just this giant asteroid slamming into the moon one day, leaving this huge mark on the surface. I can't imagine what that would have been like to see in person, as most impacts on the moon these days are from relatively small objects. There we go. Let's get a bit of a look at towards the top of the moon. We can see one of those really dark craters in the top left. It's just gorgeous to look at right there. Man. You can actually see like some mountaintops if you look towards the very top of the moon at the moment, where there's like that dark bit. You can see like the curvature of the moon itself and like all the little mountain ridges and everything. This is a really nice close-up view. I don't know like the total magnification. It would require like some knowledge that I don't have off the top of my head right now, like the total tube length and all that. But we're decently magnified, like I'd say over 100 times magnification to get this view. A nice, great shot of the right side of the moon as well. Whew. Let's see. Like we're coming up on the right side of the moon again. We can see that dark line sort of cutting off the moon a little bit. Again, that's because the moon is past the full phase from yesterday and is now waning and moving towards a new moon. And a fun fact about that, the eclipse that we had yesterday, that was on the full moon, as all eclipses are. You don't ever have an eclipse of like a crescent or like a gibbous moon or like even just like a half moon. any eclipse is always going to be with the full moon, as for the moon to be full, it has to be in a position to where it is facing like the sun almost like directly, and that can cause it to actually cut off the light properly. Like, for instance, with these lunar eclipses, that's when the Earth is moving between the sun and the moon and causing that shadow, which you might have been able to see last night. Or the opposite, solar eclipses, those actually only happen on a new moon, I believe, because that's when the moon moves between the Earth and the sun, and we see the moon like cut off the sun's light entirely. It's pretty awesome to see. There was that full solar eclipse, was it like 2 years ago, 2018? No, it was like 4 years ago at this point, like 2016, I believe, when we had that beautiful, great American eclipse. Now, here in Alpena, we wouldn't get the best view. I think we only had like maybe 60% totality, but there is another solar eclipse coming up, I believe, in 2024, and that's going to be a little bit better of a view for us here in Alpena. Granted, it's still only like 80-ish% of totality, but it's going to be better than it was. Now, if you want like full total solar eclipse activity, you're gonna have to go towards like the south of the state, like the bottom of Michigan, towards like Toledo over in Ohio side, as the path that the solar eclipse will take will be like from southwest California to like northeast Maine. And of course, you can look up all of this online on NASA. We've kind of have all the calculations done at this point, so we can see what the path of that solar eclipse will be with like almost 100% certainty. Although maybe it's best to have like a friend or relative you could go visit. I'm pretty sure that all of the good hotel rooms are fully booked out by now. I remember trying to book a hotel room for the last solar eclipse in 2016, like over a year in advance on that day. And like I said, like all the good hotel rooms were gone and everything. And I was like, man, I am not paying like $500 for one single night. I couldn't even afford that. I was a college student at the time, so you know how that works out. But essentially, these solar eclipses are pretty fantastic. We do get them every single year. In fact, there's another solar eclipse coming up here later in December, but it won't be visible to our half of the world. I think it's over towards like Southeast Asia, like Indian Ocean area. So maybe if for whatever reason you're going to be traveling over there in the nearest future, you'll be able to see that solar eclipse. I don't know like how full or total it'll be though. I generally just ignore them when they're in remote parts of the world that I'm not going to be seeing. But either way, if you're really curious and you have the ability to travel like that, there are probably plenty of places you could go to see that total solar eclipse. I know there actually are solar eclipse chasers out there. I actually have met a couple of them in like the planetarium industry. And these are just people who go about looking for solar eclipses each and every year. They're just always like, oh, I gotta go to this one. So they're always like booking flights. I remember they're like 15, maybe 20 years ago, there was this one solar eclipse that could only be seen in like the Southwest Pacific over by like New Zealand and everything. And there's this little British island called Pitcairn over there. And a lot of people normally don't go to Pitcairn because it's very difficult to get to. But a lot of people flocked over there for the solar eclipse. That way they could see that beautiful view. I think that was a totality one, so of course people wanted to see those ones. Totality solar eclipses are always much more interesting than the non-totality ones. Let's go down a little bit. Let's try and get like halfway. We've seen like the top already. We've seen a little bit at the bottom. Let's try and get like a nice middle view of the moon if we can. Whew. There's also some cool things you can like see and do during solar eclipses. Like during totality, the animals don't really know what's going on. So if you're paying attention to like the birds and everything, they'll be flying into their nest and roosting, just getting ready to go to bed for the evening. Because to their perspective, it's suddenly nighttime and they need... Oh. Okay, just some loud wind moving some stuff behind me. Anyways, the birds tend to like get a little bit confused, so they'll get prepared for like sleeping. And if you're like by a bush or like a tree where birds normally roost at, you can like see them all fly in, and then once the totality is over, all fly out as they're like, oh, it's morning again. That was a really short nighttime. There's also like really cool like shadows and stuff that can be seen only during a solar eclipse. Like there's like these shadow snakes that can be seen during like special conditions. Essentially like creates these long thin shadows on the ground that look like snakes. I haven't seen them with my own two eyes, but I've seen like a few pictures of them. They're a little bit hard to record obviously, but we're getting better at doing so now that great camera technology is cheaper, easier to acquire for most people. So if you're really curious about that, maybe go online, look up like shadow snakes, like solar eclipse shadow snakes, and you might be able to see some videos of it. I haven't looked it up recently, so there might be something really new or interesting to see from that. So if anybody's just coming in, we're looking at the surface of the moon this evening. Nothing really too special or extraordinarily rare, but it's just beautiful to see, as most folks don't have the technology to whip out a 10-inch Cassegrain telescope and look at the moon up close and personal like this. With this type of technology, we can see plenty of craters, different maria and terrain as well. We could, of course, get a different eyepiece, and I could like try and zoom in better. That would create issues for trying to record this, because the closer we zoom in, the harder it becomes to actually maintain focus. Because the Earth is constantly spinning at about like 1,000 miles per hour, and even now you can see how the moon is moving towards like the left side of the screen constantly because of that rotation. And if we are zoomed in more, then I'd just have to regularly, even more so than I am now, fix the camera. Like it would be every few seconds I'd have to like adjust. That way the moon doesn't completely go off the screen. So most people don't have that type of access either, but I feel like this is a good middle ground for the time being. Maybe as I get more comfortable with this equipment, I'll try that out in the future. But for the time being, I'm just going to kind of focus on what I think is more possible. Let's see, let's get a better view of that Tycho Crater on the right side of the camera right now. It's a huge impact crater. I don't know if all you folks in here right now heard me talk about it when I was looking at it earlier. It's just this big crater that was caused by a massive asteroid impact on the moon. It actually created like a little mountain peak in the middle of it. Like it slammed into the surface of the moon, and that like caused like the surface, like the actual surface of the moon to kind of shoot up upwards after that and create a small little peak. It's being directly reflected by the sun right now, so we kind of get the view washed out. But as we move towards the right side, we'll be able to see it a bit better. Whew. Man, it's cold tonight. Are you folks? I hope all you folks are inside. It's really windy and kind of freezing. I'm like bundled up, but just kind of sitting here. It's a little bit tough to deal with for sure. So I think I'm going to give this like another 10 minutes before I pack up and go inside. I do have some good cold weather equipment, but I'm definitely not climatized for the cold winter season just yet. Especially when we have so much strong wind as well. There we go. Let's go back to the top of the moon. Notice I have to do that every now and then because the Earth isn't just like spinning left to right. It's also kind of moving at a weird angle depending on like your latitude and like what time of year things are at. So I have to constantly move to the left side of the moon again, but also occasionally move it back up as we lose sight of it. Ooh. You're just getting a great shot of those Maria, those dark spots on the surface of the moon, which aren't craters, but are actual like residue left over from volcanic eruptions like many billions of years ago, back when the moon was first forming. Now, the main theory is that the moon formed from the Earth, and while that was kind of considered not very plausible early on in astronomy, it's recently gained a lot of traction. It is actually the leading theory for what we believe caused the moon to be created. Is that probably about like 4 billion years ago, Earth was hit by like a Mars-sized planet, and that resulting collision essentially caused the Earth to like sort of turn into a big magma ball, and a little bit of it, of course, came off as well, and that created the moon that we see. Let's try and... there we go. That wind's shaking my view quite a bit. Now we're kind of losing focus, unfortunately. Dang it. Well, I was kind of hoping to show more of the moon off this evening, but looks like things just aren't really working out too well. Oh, there we go. Never mind. Definitely need to clean this lens. This thing's probably been in storage for way too long. So maybe when I have some free time tomorrow, I'll take it apart and clean off all that residue and debris. That way it can be viewed a little bit better. Oof. So if you're out observing tonight, if you look a little bit below the moon, let's see, where is it at the moment? I'd say like more like right with a little bit of down. You can actually see the constellation of Orion, which is just finally beginning to show up for the year. Orion's always a late bloomer. It doesn't even show up in the sky until like December at like reasonable hours. So he's that bright winter constellation. Most people know him for Orion's belt, which is just that 3 lines across. And in the future, I hope to actually show off what is known as the Orion Nebula. And the Orion Nebula is actually located in the sword belt on the left side of the constellation, like just kind of below where his belt starts on the left side. There's like 3 vertical stars, and that star in the middle is actually known as the Orion Nebula, because if you look at it with like any sort of magnification, it gets like fuzzy and grainy, and then when you zoom in a whole bunch, you see it's like just this big open cloud region of like star forming area. So that sword belt isn't actually like a vertical Orion's belt. It's actually 2 stars flanking a actual nebula. It's really beautiful to see. It does kind of look like just gray clouds without any specific lenses, but it's still cool that we can see a nebula with our naked eye all the same. Gotta change my position. I've been kneeling for about the past half hour, cutting off circulation in my feet. That's really gorgeous to look at. Man, I love looking at the moon. Seriously, I could probably do this all night if my body wasn't turning into a popsicle. Alright, let's move back towards the left side of the moon, shall we? Well, everything's kind of opposite, so we're actually looking towards the right side right now, I believe. Mirrors are weird. They always mess with my point of view. There we go. Yeah, let's see. moon's a little bit too far away to see with this much detail normally, obviously. And that looks like it's it. Oh, is that everybody? Looks like it, so I'm just going to finish.